Hey everyone, in this video we'll finish up our basic to-do app by building a front end to use the API that we created earlier. We'll use Axios to make some API calls to our Django API. It will be a good idea to have a basic understanding of React before starting this, although this will be a very basic React video. If some of this doesn't make sense, watching a quick React crash course video on YouTube should clear any of this up, and you can also ask a question in the comments, and I'll try to help you if possible. With that said, let's get started. So the first thing we do is we need to generate a new React project. And also, just as a note here, I am currently running my Django server, so make sure you have that running in the background. But if you open a different terminal to go to our app here and do an ls, we're inside of just our root project folder here. And if I type in npx create -react -app and give it a name, I'll call this one front end, and press enter, that should generate a create React app. It might take a second for this to finish. Okay, and now with that done, we can go and take a look at our front end now. So if we look inside of our front end folder, we'll see we have a bunch of stuff here. First, we'll have is these node modules, and this isn't very important for what we'll do here. This will hold our dependencies. We can ignore that folder as we won't really be using that for anything. This public folder will hold a few things that are important. It will hold the index.html, which you'll see here. We have an ID of root, and this is used to actually load in all of our code from our React app. Will come inside this folder, or inside this file. So in here we can change the title, or whatever else. So I'll just change this to do. If you want to add some other CSS external style sheets or anything else here, any other link elements up here, you can add all that to this file here. Next, we'll come down to our source folder, and this has everything that we'll actually use to build our React app. So you'll see we have an app.js. We also have an index.js. This index.js, you'll see down here, it says document get element by ID in root. So all we're doing here is we're getting this right here, this element here, and kind of loading everything inside of this div tag. You also notice right now, the highlighting is kind of off. That's because React uses JSX, which is a different version of HTML. It has different tags you can use, and that kind of throws out the highlighting by default. To do this, you'll have to install some packages. I already have these installed, so I'm not going to install them here, but I'll show you how to install them. If you hit Control-Shift-P, you'll get this little drop down here. We can type in package control. And you'll see if you come down here to install package. From here, we can type Babel. And there should be a Babel snippets in here. I already have it installed, so maybe it's not going to show up now. But you should see a Babel-snippets show up. And you can install that. And then once it's installed, you might need to restart Sublime. But once you have it installed and everything, you should be able to go into the View tab up here, come down to Syntax, come over to Babel, and click on JavaScript. And that will fix this text highlighting for you. And you might need to do it to each file you make. So you come here and just do Syntax, Babel, JavaScript, and it fixes all the highlighting. Okay, with that said, let's go back to our index.js here. What we're loading in here is just our app. And you'll see here, we're getting this from our app.js. So what I'm trying to say here is that this app.js is our root JavaScript file that will be loaded into our app. So this is the file where everything needs to go into to actually show up on the actual web page itself. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, I'd go through and watch a quick React crash course that kind of goes through how all this kind of works together. Another way we can set this highlighting to work correctly, if you go to a different file here, we can do a Control-Shift-P and type set syntax JavaScript Babel, and that should fix it as well. Okay, with that said, let's go ahead and get started by actually building our app. And so you'll see we have a bunch of other stuff here that we don't really need. We have an apps.css, we have this logo SVG, and this is stuff we don't really need at all for this project. So I'm gonna go ahead and start deleting things to kind of clean this up. So I delete that, I come back into my app.js. We load in the logo right here, so I'm gonna remove that. And remove everything inside of our apps.js to start. Let's get rid of all this because I'm not gonna use any of this. Go ahead and just add a fragment tag right here, and I'll just put in just app. And this right here, an empty tag is a React fragment, and that will just give us a parent element that we can put things inside of. It doesn't do anything else. Okay, and now with that done, with all that cleaned up, I think that's all we'll need to delete. I'm gonna go and delete everything out of our CSS files as well. We don't need that. all either. So we'll get rid of all that. I think that should be it. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this app now so we can see how it works and make sure we're not missing anything. So we go to a terminal and jump back into the one where we just installed our application. If we do an ls, you'll see we have our front end folder here. We can cd into front end, and then we can run npm run start, and that's what will run our application. It will open up in a new window. So I'll pull that over here. And you'll see now we run and all it says is app because it's all we have inside of our app.js file right here. So everything's working well and it will show up here when we render the page. Okay, now let's go ahead and build our components. So in React, you can have these separate components and you can load them into your file the same way we loaded in this app file. So this app file, this app.js file is pretty much a component itself. If we go into our index.js, and you'll see here we have this just app tag that we put in here, and we import that in from our app file itself. And so you can create different components and just load them in as tags into our root file. That's how we'll kind of split things up and kind of organize our project. We'll have an add to do component and a to do component. The add to do component will just have a form that will add it to do, and the to do component will display one to do. And so what we'll do is we'll loop through all of our to-dos and create a to-do component to display all those to-dos. Let's go ahead and set this up now, and hopefully it will make a little more sense once we do that. Inside of our source folder, I'm going to create a new folder and call it components. Inside of our components folder, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to save this as add to-do.js. And the sort of normal way to create your files here is to start with a capital letter, and so that's why I'm starting this with the capital A. Inside of here, we can go and create a new component. I'm going to create just functional components and not use classes. In older versions of React and some older tutorials, you might see them create class components, but now with React hooks, which we'll get to a little later, you can do everything which is functional components pretty easily. And so I'm just going to use just normal arrow functions in JavaScript. We'll be using a lot of ES6, so you'll need to have a little bit of understanding of that. So our syntax will look a little different if you're not familiar with that. Let's go ahead and create a component here. So first I need to import React. So I'll do import React from, and just in quotes, React. Below this, I'm going to go ahead and create a component. So I'll do const, and this is add to do, so we'll call it add to do equals, and that equals parentheses and our arrow function, and this will hold all of our code for our component. Every functional component needs to return something to render anything to the screen. So we can just do a return, and pass in quotes or pass in parentheses to render anything to the screen. And now we can put any sort of JSX inside of this return function here, or this return statement here, to actually render anything to the screen. So in this case, I'll go ahead and just put an H1 and put to do and close this off. Now I'll go ahead and save that. And now let's go back into our app.js. Let's go ahead and bring this component in. So I can go ahead and import it like how the index.js imports the app component. I can do import add to do from, and we'll import this from our /components/ add to do. We'll save that. And now below, we'll remove this app here. Instead, I'm going to go ahead and put in a tag here to do, or add to do. And we'll go ahead and close off that tag like you would with any other element, HTML element we would. Now we go back into our browser here. We're getting an error here, /component/ add to do does not contain a default export. There's one thing I forgot. I always forget this. At the very bottom of every component, we need to export this function that we created up here. So you export this add to do function. So down here, I can just type export default add to do and save that. Now let's go ahead and open this back up. And you'll see here we have our to do H1 showing up. Now inside of our app.js, we can still put whatever we want ahead of this. So we want to just put something like an H1 here that said my to-dos, and then close off this H1 here, and then let's go and maybe change this in here and our add to do just to be an H5 or something, make it smaller. We can still build our app this way, and we'll have our my to-dos, and our component will show up below that. So we can just build our app out with these different components any way we want within our app.js file. But now we'll need another component. We'll need an actual to-do component. So let's go ahead and create another file in here, and we'll save this as to-do with a capital T.js. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and copy this add to-do to start this so we have a starting point. So I'll go and just copy this, come into our to-do, and paste it there. Okay. And now once again, I'm going to go ahead and bring this component in to our app.js. So up here, I'll do from or import to-do from /components /to-do, and I'll put this right below our add to-do. And then just to make this a little more clear, let's go to add to-do and change this text here to add to-do, so you can see how it's all loading up. And it looks like we're getting, oh, I forgot. Let's go back here. Let's actually make this this to-do text here a little different. So we'll go ahead and delete the add to-do here and delete it down here. Let's go ahead and try this again. Now let's save this and jump back into our browser. There we go. So now we have our add to-do component shown up there and our to-do component shown up below that. And now inside of our app.js, what we're going to do is once we have our API calls, we're going to loop through them and create a to-do component for each individual to-do in our database. Now that we have everything set up and ready to go and our components ready to go, let's start by creating our add to-do form. And so what I want to use here, I want to use something called React Bootstrap. We'll go to React Bootstrap, and this is just something we can install with npm. It's just a package that gives us all of our Bootstrap components made, ready to use for React, and it makes it a little bit easier to use. If you look in the documentation, you'll see we have all the different components that we normally have with Bootstrap, but the code just set up a little differently. That's just a little easier to use for React. So to install this, you can go back to the home page here and get started. First thing we do is install React Bootstrap and Bootstrap. So I'm gonna go and copy this line, go back into our terminal here, and actually, let's actually open a new terminal so I don't overwrite this. And inside of here, I can go ahead and paste that in. And actually first, let's go ahead and cd into let's cd into front end and then run that command. So we'll go and paste that in here and run that. That might take a second for it to install. Okay, and now with that installed, we can start using our components. But one thing we do need to do first is we need to add this line right here. We need to add the actual CSS file. So I'm going to copy this. And it says right here, the following line can be included in your index.js or app.js file. I want to put mine in the index.js just so it's kind of out of the way and not cluttering up my app.js. So put that right there and save that. Now, if we come back to our app here, you'll see that we already have some style changes. We already have the text changes that come with Bootstrap. So we know everything's set up and ready to go now. And now we can start to actually build out the to-do form using these components. So back inside of here, we went to the side here and searched for form. You'll see here we can go to the forms and we get an idea of how a form looks. We create a form tag, and add a form.group, form.label, and form.control to create everything we need to create. And so you can come here and easily find the components you need either through this list or by searching for it up here. So let's go ahead and start building that form. So inside of our add-to-do.js, I'm going to remove this add-to-do h5 and replace it with some other code instead. So what we're going to create first is a form. So inside of here, we'll create a form. Inside this form here, we're going to put a form.group, and this will have a control ID equaling to title. And this is all coming from the documentation. You can look on there to see what this is all doing. But it should be pretty straightforward. Next, we'll create a label, or create a form.label, form.label. And the label of this input here will be title. So we'll type title. We'll close off that form.label. Next, we need a form.control. So do form.control. And this will have a type equaling to text and a placeholder equaling to enter to do title. And for now, we'll go and close off this. just like that. And then we'll go ahead and close off this form.group right here. Let's go ahead and add the slash here in front. Okay, now let's go ahead and import this form up here at the top. So at the top here, I'll do import and pass in curly braces. And inside of these curly braces, I'll type form from React-Bootstrap. Save that. Now let's jump back into our app here. And it looks like we're getting an error. Oh, I forgot to close off my other tag up here. So let's come up back here, and I created this. I forgot to close off my form. That's what it was. Okay, so we got to close off the form here as well. So go and do that and save that. Okay, now back into our app here. You'll see we have a input here with a title, or with a label of title, and a placeholder here enter to do title. So that's working well. Let's go ahead and create another input. And this will be for a description. So we'll have a title and a description on each of the, for each of the to-dos. So we're going to copy this one down here. I'm just going to add it right below here, and we'll change a couple things to make it a description. So this will be changed to description. And the label will be description as well. And we'll do enter, we'll enter description. Go ahead and save that, jump back into our app here, and we should have two inputs now, right there, one for to do and one for description. Okay, now let's go ahead and add a button, because once we have our data inputted, we need to find a way to submit it. So we'll add a button. Up here at the top here, I'm going to import the button as well. And below this form group here, I'm going to add the button. So we'll use our button tag, and we'll do a variant equals primary. And all this will do is we'll give it the blue color, the kind of the primary color for Bootstrap. In this case, it's the blue. We'll give it a type equaling to submit. And for now, that will be all we'll have here in our button. We're going to go ahead and put the text of add to do for the button, and we'll close off the button tag. Let's go ahead and go back into our app here, and you'll see we have an add to do button. Right now, it's not going to do anything because we haven't set anything up yet. So we have our form here, and everything's there, but it doesn't look very good. Let's go ahead and add some things to our app.js to make all this look a little better. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add a wrapper class around all of this. And then I'm going to add some other Bootstrap classes here to kind of make it all look a little bit better. So it's not on the edges, and it's looks a little prettier. So inside of our Sublime text, we'll go back to our app.js, and we want to go ahead and import a couple things. We want to bring in a container, a row, a column, and a card. So if you know Bootstrap somewhat well, you should know what these are already. The container will just give it a little bit of a gutter that keeps it off the edges. The row and column will be used for the grid system for placing items, and the card gives it the white color with the little border and shadow to kind of pop it up from the screen a little bit. So we'll import all of those from React Bootstrap. And down here inside of our return here, we can add what we want down here. So first things first, I'm going to change this fragment here to a div. So I'm going to do a div with a class name equaling to wrapper. And notice here we put class name, not class. Since we're in JavaScript, we need to use class name because class is already a reserved keyword. Also change my closing tag to a div as well. And now inside of here, I'm going to add the container, row, and column. So I'll create a container element. Inside of here, I'll create a row element. Inside of here, I'll create a column element. Inside the column, I'll create a card. And inside this card, I'll put my data here. So I'll put, I'll go ahead and remove this my to-dos, or I'll keep it here. I'll put my to-dos, but I'll put it in a h3 tag instead. Make it a little smaller. And now below this, we'll have our add to do right here. And Below that, we'll put our actual to-dos. So I'll go and just tab all this in right there. Now let's go and close off all these tags. So close off our column, or close off our card first. Let's go and fix these indents as well. These shall be indented in as well, like that. Okay, now let's close off our column. Let's close off our row. Let's close off our container. Make sure we have our slashes in here, just like that. Okay, let's save that. Now let's come back into our app here, and you'll see now we have things that was looking a lot better. It's now centered, and there's some spacing here to make it look a little better. The only big issue right now is here at the top. We're still stuck to the top of the screen, and there's no padding on the edges of our card. Let's go ahead and make that change real quick. So inside of our app.js, on our card element itself, we can add a class name to this. So add a class name equaling to padding top -5, just normal bootstrap there. Or actually, let's do a padding -5 to put on all sides. We also want to go on our row up here, and we want to add two classes here. So add a class name equaling justify content center, and we want to add a padding top -5. Let's go ahead and save those changes, come back here and see what it looks like. So now we're centered and we're down a little bit of spacing here, and we have some spacing on the edges here. This is already looking a lot better. The last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a change here. I'm gonna put this background color to be a slight gray, just to give it a slight difference from our card, kind of make them stand out a little bit. So you'll see we already created a wrapper class on our div. Let's go and add some styles to that to change the background color on it. I'm gonna put this inside of our index.css file. So inside of here, I'm gonna put a .wrapper to create a class for our wrapper class, and we'll change the background color to be F3, 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 and we'll also add a height of 100 VH. So what this will do is it will span the entire screen height. And we'll come back here, and you'll see now it's a slight gray that's separated from our actual to-do card itself. Okay, now with that done, let's go and build out a basic to-do component with some dummy data for now until we make the API calls. So back inside of our text editor, we'll go into our to-do.js to start building something in here. So what we'll do here is we want a checkbox to the left that will allow us to mark a to-do as completed. We want to put the title and description to the right, and then to the very far right of that, we want to put two buttons, one to edit the to-do and one to delete it. So let's go ahead and start by creating the checkbox. So I'll go ahead and create a React fragment to make this the parent. And inside of here, we'll go ahead and create a few things. So first, let's create a row. We'll give this a class name equaling to border-bottom to give it a border on the bottom, and a padding top -3. Now, before I forget, I should just go ahead and import everything we need up here. So we'll import from React Bootstrap. We need to add a few things from React-Bootstrap. So first things first, obviously we'll need a row. So let's bring that in. We're also gonna use our column again, so we'll bring that in as well. We also need to bring in a form, a button, and a modal, which we'll use later. Okay, now let's go ahead inside of this row, and let's create ourselves a column like we normally do. And I'm gonna give this a column a size. So first we'll create a CLL, and we'll do an MD equals, and then curly braces 1. And that will give it a 1 unit width. So like in Bootstrap, we have 1 through 12 for the column widths. 1 is the smallest width possible. And in this case, that works well because all we have is a checkbox. So we'll make this column as small as we possibly can. Now inside of this column, we want to go ahead and create a form that will hold a checkbox. So we'll create a form. Inside this form here, we'll do a form.check to create a checkbox. We'll give this a type equaling checkbox. And now inside of this, and for now, we'll go and just close off this tag for now, and we'll come back to this and add an event handler to it later. Now below this checkbox, we want to go and close off this form. We also close off this column. Now next, we want to create another column, and this will hold the title and the description of the to-do. So create a column. This one we won't give it a size. We'll just leave it to be how it is and let it fit automatically. Inside of this column, we're going to create H5, and this will hold our to-do title. And for now, we'll just put to-do title. Below that, we're gonna put the to-do description. So we'll do let's do p tag, and we'll do a to-do description. Now it's going to close off this column. Now it's going to create one more column, and this will hold our edit and delete buttons. So we'll create a column. This time we will give it a size as well. We'll give it a size of 2. Inside of this column here, create another form. And inside of this form here, we'll create 2 buttons. So we'll do a button. Actually, we'll create 2 separate forms. So we'll do first one for this first form, we'll create a button. And inside this button, we'll give it a variant equaling to info. We'll go ahead and give it a class name equaling to margin y-2 to give it some top and bottom padding, or some margin, I mean, and a btn-block to make it stretch the length of the block. And we'll go ahead and close off this tag and close off this form. I'm gonna go ahead and copy this down one more time to create the next button. And actually, I completely forgot. I don't want to close off the tag like this. I need to give it some actual text. So this one will be edit. Close off this button. And this one down here will be delete. Just going to fix that real quick. Delete. Just like that. Okay. And this info will be changed to danger to make it a red button. Let's go ahead and save that now. Let's close off this column right here. Let's close off our row. And let's close off, well, that should be it actually. So we'll go and save that. Let's come back into our app here, and looks like we're getting an error. JSX and tag. Looks like I had a typo somewhere. I forgot to put out the closing tag right there. There we go. And so now you'll see here, we have our to-do showing up right here. We have an edit and a delete button, which right now don't do anything. We have a checkbox, which we can check and uncheck right here. And we have our title and description. And we can go ahead and just test it with multiple ones by coming up to our app.js and just copying this a couple times. Just like that. And you'll see we have multiple to-dos showing up right here. So now we have everything kind of set up here with dummy data. Let's go and actually put some real data from our API inside of our to-dos here and actually make this add to-do button work and these edit and delete button work as well. So before we get started again, you need to make sure you're running your Django server. I'd do that on one of these right here. Make sure this is running. If not, this is not going to work at all. So just to double check that, make sure that's working. First thing I want to do is I want to do a GET request to get the to-dos. So just to make sure, remember what we did last time. We go to our API. We'll have a route here that goes localhost 8000 API /v1/to-do, and this will have our to-dos. Right now we just have one in there. I'm gonna create one more test one that we can use, that we can grab. So I'll do a test to do. And we'll go ahead and post this here. And so we want to go ahead and make the GET request right here. When we hit GET, this will get a request at this URL, localhost 8000 API /v1/to-do. We want to get that to get back these 2 to-dos. There's various different ways you can do this in JavaScript, but I'm going to use a package called Axios to do this. So if we go back into our terminal here, like this one should be fine, where we install React Bootstrap. I'm going to do npm install pmi Axios to install Axios. And this is just a package that makes it very easy to handle getting or making any sort of API request. You can look on the documentation online. I'll link this in the description below so you can look at this. But it's pretty simple to use, and it should be pretty easy for it to get up and running with this pretty quickly without really knowing how it works. You'll see here we have different methods on top of Axios that we can call. So a GET for a GET request, a post for a post request, put for a put request, and delete for a delete request. And those are the 4 we're going to use in this API to make our different calls. So back inside of our app here, let's go ahead and use Axios to make our first API request or API call. So the first things first, we want to go ahead and actually import Axios. So up to the top, I'll do import Axios from Axios. Okay, now with that in here, we can go ahead and create a function that will handle getting all of our to-dos from that API. And if you just go ahead and create a, did something like axios.get and passed in localhost 8000 slash API slash whatever. This will not work because there'll be a CORS error with how this is set up. And so we can get around this a couple different ways. We could change something in our Django app to handle this, or what we can do is we can go into our package.json and we can add a proxy here. And so this package.json will just hold all of our information for our project. You'll see we have our different dependencies right here. We have our scripts, the start script we ran earlier, and everything else right here. We can also add up here below private, we can add a proxy. And this proxy will be the localhost 8000 where our server is running. So we'll type localhost or HTTP : / and we'll type localhost : 8000 and put a comma at the end there and save that. And now inside of our API or inside of our app.js, all we gotta do is we can just do an Axios.get and pass in /API/v1/todo to make a call to that. We don't need a localhost 8000. That's already set up in our project inside of our package.json. You might need to go ahead and stop the server and rerun it though, for that change to be picked up. So I'm gonna go and do that now just to make sure. So if I stop the server and rerun it by running npm run start, we can go and close out some of these tags, some of these old one over here we don't need. And right here. Okay, so now everything's running. Let's go ahead and make an API request. So inside of our app component, let's go ahead and create a function. So above the return, I'm going to go ahead and create a function called get to-dos, and this will be an asynchronous function. And we'll need to just put async and await before our API actual call itself. And so just make sure you have that there as well. Now inside of this function, we're going to do a try catch. So do a try statement in here. And we'll do a catch down here, and we'll pass in ERR. And if there's an error, we'll go into console.log the error. Now inside of our try statement here, we can go ahead and actually make the Axios get request. So I'll do a const response equals await Axios.get, and then pass in /API/v1/todo. Now we can get that response, which will just give us a bunch of data. Inside that response, though, we'll have a data object that holds the actual to-dos itself. And using ES6, we can destructure that data from the response itself. So we can do a const and curly braces data equals response. And this will just pull out the data object that's inside this response value here. Now we can access data directly without going response.data. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, looking up some things about ES6 and destructuring should clear that up pretty quickly. So next, we want to go ahead and store these to-dos somewhere. And to do this, we're going to use React use state hooks. And these React hooks are these built-in functions that will allow us to do different things. And in a use state, we'll hold some local state inside of our function. So it'll give us a place to store our data. So up here at the top, we can import that from React. So up here, I'm going to do import React, comma, and in curly braces here, use state. This will be from React. And now to use this use state hook, at the top of our app here, we'll do a const and create an array. And we'll give it first the name of the state we want, which in this case is to-dos. And next we need to give it a name of a function that will allow us to set the to-dos. And so to keep it simple, we'll call this set to-dos. This will equal use state. And then inside of our parentheses here, we got to give it a default value. In this case, our default value will be an empty array, just like that. So now, once we have our data right here, we can go and store this inside of this to-dos value by calling this set to-dos function. So down here, I'll type set to-dos and pass in data. Now we'll store our data inside of the to-dos array. And that's all we need to do to get the to-dos. Now we need to call this function somewhere that will allow us to actually get the to-dos. And so in older versions of React, you could do that with like a component did mount or something similar to that. But since we're trying to use some newer stuff here and we're using React hooks, we'll use another hook called use effect. So up here at the top here, I'm gonna go put a comma and put use effect. And this will be another hook we can use inside of our function. And what use effect will do is it will run whatever code we put inside of it every time the component renders. And we can give it a list of dependencies that will cause it to re-render. In this case, all we want to do is just run once when the application loads to get the to-dos, display them to the user. So now below our get to-dos function, I'm going to go ahead and use the use effect by typing use effect, pass in parentheses. Now inside these parentheses, I need to create a function. So I'll use an arrow function again, using parentheses, equals, and then the arrow, and then we'll use some curly braces here. And now inside of here, we can call our get to-dos function. And now finally, the last thing we'll need here is at the very end of our function here, inside of our parentheses still, instead of our use effects itself, we'll put a comma and empty square brackets here. And that will cause it to run once the application loads. Hopefully that all makes sense right there. We can go and save that now. And now we should be able to get our to-dos this way. Now with the to-dos, we want to go ahead and loop through this to-dos array and display them inside of our data here. And we can do this first by getting rid of all these extra to-dos we don't need. And instead we can use a map function. And so what the map function will do is it'll just loop through the array itself. And so to add some JavaScript within the JSX inside of this return value here, we need to put curly braces. So we put curly braces, and then inside of here we can put a to-dos.map. And inside of our map function, we can create another function by creating curly braces, or putting parentheses, put an arrow, and then we'll put parentheses again, and this will hold all of our data inside of here. We want to pass in two values to the map. The first one being the index, or the item itself. So what variable do we want to call the item? In this case, to keep it simple, we'll call it to do. And next, we're going to pass in the actual index. So this will hold the actual number of the index of this specific item. And so I'll call this just index to make it hopefully clear what it is. And now inside of here, I can go ahead and display my to-do. So I'll create a to-do function, or create a to-do component right here. And we'll need to pass our data into this component to make it work. We've not set that up yet, so let's set that up now. So I'm going to go ahead and right now create a to-do component. Let's jump into our to-do component itself, and we can have it taking some parameters. So we want to pass in the ID, the title, and the description into this, into the parameters up here. This will go through the props through React. So hopefully if you understand React, you'll understand what props are. And instead of typing props.id or whatever else, what we can do here is we can destructure that again like we did earlier with the data from the response by typing two curly braces and typing in the different pieces of data we need. In this case, it will be ID, title, and description. And now down here, instead of showing this to-do title, we can show some JavaScript by putting curly braces and typing in title. We can put in, instead of this to-do description, we can put the actual description in by typing curly braces description as well. Now let's go back and actually set this value, set this data inside of our app.js. So now to add this, we need to put title, or first ID, equals, and then whatever the ID value is. In this case, we'll get it from the to-do, and we passed in right here. So this will equal curly braces again, to-do.id, to get the current ID off the to-do that we're on. And do the same thing for the title and description. So title equals curly braces to-do.title. Description equals to-do.description. Just like that. Now we come back into our app here. You'll see we already have our to-dos loaded. We have our first to-do right here, our second to-do, and the one we just created right here, to-do and test to-do. So we've already loaded in all of our to-dos with just that code right there. Next, let's keep this going by making this add to-do form up here work. So let's go back into our app.js, and this will work very similar to what we just did when it comes to making the API call. So what I want to do, let's go below all of this here, below the use effect, below the get to-dos. Let's create another function, const add to-do, and this will equal an asynchronous function again. So I'll type async, and we'll call this, and we'll pass in parentheses and make another arrow function right here. and we'll make our API call here. But first, we need to go ahead and get the actual to-do that we want to add. And so inside of here, I can type a value of what we want to call that. In this case, I'll call it new to-do. And since we only have one parameter, I don't need the parentheses, so I can delete those, make our function look like that. Next, let's go ahead and once again create a try catch statement right here. So put try, and down here I'll put catch, and we'll pass an ERR. And if we have an error, we'll just console.log the error. Next, inside of our try, we can go ahead and just make a post request. If we go back into our app here, you'll see when we add a to-do, we're making a post request to the API. So, and with Axios, we can type await Axios.post to make a post request and pass in the API/v1/to-do, and then put a comma and pass in what we want to add to the body of the request, which will be our new to-do. In this case, it's called new to-do. And that's all we need to do to post a new value to the API. And finally, we want to go ahead and run the get to-dos function again to get the new to-dos, the updated list of to-dos to display to the user. That's all we need to do to actually make this API request. But now we need to actually make this work with our add to-do component. So somehow we need to go ahead and call this add to-do function, passing in the new to-do values. And to do this, once again, we'll go ahead and use a prop. So what we'll do is we'll add this add to do function as a prop so we can call it inside of our add to do component. Right now it's local to this scope right here of just our get to do's component, or our app component up here. And that's not going to be very helpful when we want to actually want to call it within this add to do file itself. And so the easy way around that is just to add a prop to this. So we'll call it add to do, and set that equal to our add to do function. And now we have access to this inside of our add to do component. Let's go ahead and go in there and make this part work. So inside of our add to do component, so first we want to destructure our add to do function inside of our parameters here by typing add to do inside of curly braces. And we want to call this add to do once this button is submitted. But to do this, we need to do a couple other things first. Right now, we have no way of getting our title and our description data from these input fields. So let's change that now by adding some state using the use state hook again. So up here at the top, I can import the use state hook, curly braces, use state. And now inside of our component here, we can add two pieces of state for each of our input fields. So first we have our text field for the to-do title. So I'll create a piece of state and we'll call it title, and do set title as the setter function to actually change the value. And we'll once again put use state, and then we'll put a default of just a string. Next, I'll go ahead and create a description and put set description as the setter function for that. And this will be equal to use state, and the default once again will be an empty string. Now, once we make a change to one of these fields, I want to update this piece of state. And then once we submit the button, I can see what's inside of this state here and use that to actually create a new object and send it to our add to do function. So this would be pretty easy. All we need to do is go onto our form control here and add an on change. This on change function will run every time this value changes at all. So whenever we type something new in here, it will then be updated in our state. So then inside of here, we can go create a function using the E value you get when you have an event handler. So I'll type E, and we'll add in our function here, our arrow function. And then we'll call set title. And we'll put e.target.value as the value for this. And that will grab the value of this field here. Once again, we'll do the same thing down here for our description. So I'll go ahead and copy this. Come into our description here. And now make sure we change the title to description, and we should be set up there. And now we have these values set up and ready to use them. Let's go ahead and add a event handler to our button itself. So I don't want to call this directly because I want to also prevent the default behavior of a submit button. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and add an on-click event handler right here. Set this equal to add to do handler, which we'll create here in a second. So let's go ahead here to the top and we'll create a new function, const add to do handler. This will just hold nothing, right? Just like this. And what we want to do here is we want to go ahead and first prevent the default. So actually I do want to, this should be an E, I guess. And then inside here, you can put e.prevent default. This is just normal JavaScript to prevent the default behavior. And next I can go and call this add to do function. So I can type add to do. We can pass in an object that holds the values that we want. So what we need to pass in is the title and the description and a completed set to false. So we can type title colon title, but using E is 6, we don't need to do this if these two values are the same. We can go ahead and delete this and just put just title. And that's the same thing as title colon title. Do the same thing for the description. And then finally, we'll put the completed and set that to false. And there we go. So now when we send this to the front end, we'll send a object that holds all of our data that we can send in to the API to create a new to-do. Hopefully that all makes sense. Let's go and jump back into our app.js and console log this so you can kind of see what's happening here. What we'll do here is we'll go ahead and do a console log new to-do so we can see this what we're passing in right here. But now when we go ahead and submit that, it will call this function. It will take this new to-do value. It will pass it into this API call to create a new to-do, and then we'll get the updated list of to-dos to display the new to-do as well on our application. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. That was kind of a lot there, but if we go ahead here and add a to-do and add a description, just add whatever, and add to-do, it shows up here at the bottom. If we go into our console here, you will see that we have an object here with all the data we passed in. So all we're doing is passing this data into our API, just like we did in this form down here. We added the title, description, and the completed value, and that created a new to-do for us. One thing you'll see here is that we have a warning. Each child in the list should have a unique key prop. So back inside of our app here, and so all we need to do here is just add this key prop to our to-do component, and we'll do that to any child component inside of an iteration. So in this case, since we're iterating over the to-dos array, we have multiple things coming out. React likes you to have a unique key value on each of the child components, and so the index of the current to-do is a great unique value for that component. And so we just set that here, key equals index. Okay, now we have our add to-dos working. Let's go ahead and keep going and make our checkbox work. So when we checkbox one of these, I want this to-do to go away, just be marked as completed and just disappear from the list. So to do this, we need to do two things. First, we need to make an API call here that will mark this to-do as completed whenever I click this button. But we also want to filter this list to only show those that are not completed. So back inside of our app here, when we're showing our to-do components, we're gonna add one more check before we actually show the component. And so I'll type not to do dot completed, and then do and to do and our to do component. So what we're doing here is we're checking, is this to do completed? If it's not, then we'll go ahead and show the rest of this. So by using the short circuit operator here, we can check if this is true. If this comes out to be true, then we'll run this. If not, this over here gets ignored. And so that just will only show the to-dos that are completed. Now with that done, right now it should change nothing because they're all completed. Or they're all not completed, I mean. Let's go ahead and add an API call to actually make this work to mark it as completed. So to do this, back inside our app.js, we'll create another function, and we'll call it just complete to do, I guess, up here at the top to handle all this logic. So let's go ahead up here, we'll create another function, const complete to do. This will be equal to another asynchronous function, async. We'll need to pass in an ID, and that's our only parameter, so I can get rid of the parentheses. And inside of this complete to do function, let's go ahead and create a try catch like we have been doing. So try, and then catch. If there's an error, we'll call it ERR. We'll go to console log that error. Inside of this try statement here, we need to do two things. First, we need to grab the to-do that matches this ID. So what we can do is we can go through all the to-dos in our to-do array and just find the one that matches. We'll use the JavaScript filter function to make this a little easier. So what we can do here is we can type const to-do equals to-dos dot filter, and we'll pass in, we'll call it to-do, and we'll pass an arrow function and put to-do dot ID equals ID. And so what this will do is it'll return an array where the value matches this. And so if the current to-do we're looping through, if that ID matches this ID, it'll return it into an array for us. This should only return one ID since the IDs are unique. So I'll put square brackets and a 0 to grab the first element in that array. Now that I have that to-do element saved in this to-do value, let's go ahead and mark it as completed. So we can do that by typing to-do.completed equals true. And then finally, we can make our API call using await Axios.put, and we'll put in backticks. So above the tab key, we'll see backticks, and I'll put API/v1/to-do, and then / I need to pass in this ID. So just to make sure this is clear, inside of here, if you want to edit this to-do, this first to-do, we have to go into a URL and add that ID to the end of the URL. That gives us this option here to make a put request to actually edit this to-do. So inside of our API call, we got to do the same thing. API/v1/to-do, and since we put backticks, we can type a $sign and 2 curly braces to pass in some JavaScript. In this case, we'll pass in the ID. And add our trailing slash. And this creates the same URL that we use up in our browser to edit this to-do. And finally, we can go ahead and pass in this to-do value to the body of this request by putting a comma and passing in to-do. And then finally, like we did last time, we'll call our get to-dos to get the updated list of to-dos. We'll go ahead and save that. And now we need to call this function whenever that checkbox is clicked. And so once again, we'll need to make this change inside of our to-do component. But this function right now is not accessible to our to-do component. So we need to add it as a prop to make it accessible. So over here, we'll put complete to-do equals complete to-do. Let's go and save that. Let's jump into our to-do and add this to our checkbox. So to do this, we need to add an event handler to our form checkbox itself. So below the type here, I can add on change. So everything in this value is changed. We can go ahead and put equals, and we'll call our complete to do. Now we also bring this in up here at the top. So up here, I'll put complete to do to get this value accessible to us here. Now inside of this on change here, I'll do complete to do and pass in the ID. And now that's all we should need to make this work. So let's go back into our browser here. Come back to our to-do app here, read the page, and if we click on one, you'll see once we click on it, it goes away because now it's marked as to-do, or it's marked as completed. And inside of our app here, and our app.js here, we filtered out anything that's not marked as completed, or anything that is marked as complete, I should say. And that makes it just disappear from the list. And now if we refresh the page, it's still gone, and it's all still working really well. Okay, now the last step is to make our edit and delete buttons work. Right now, they're doing nothing. So let's make those work as well. So first, we'll do our delete button, as that will be the most simple one to do. This will be just like the other things. We'll make a delete request to remove this from the list and delete it from the database. So back inside of our Sublime text editor, inside of our app.js, once again, we need to make an API request. So we'll create another function down here to handle that logic. So do a const delete to do equals async. And we'll pass in just an ID again, and we'll create our function just like that. So this will be pretty similar. We'll create a try catch statement once again, passing in error, error, and if there is an error, we'll log that error. So console.log error. Next, we need to go ahead and make the actual Axios.delete call itself. So we'll do await Axios.delete. We'll pass in a string of API/v1/to-do. And then once again, these actually need to be backticks because we need to go to the actual ID itself. Once again, this to delete one, we need to make a delete request on the URL with the ID inside the URL. So we need to go ahead and use our backticks and our $ parentheses to pass in the ID into the URL. And that will delete the to-do from the database. And then once that's done, we go ahead and get the updated list of to-dos by doing get to-dos. And this will show us the updated list of to-dos. And that's it for that function. Let's go ahead and once again pass this as a prop to our to-do component. So down here, we'll scroll over and we'll add another prop by doing, we'll call it delete to-do. And set this equal to the delete to-do function that we just created. We'll go inside of our to-do component, and once again, we'll bring it in over here, delete to-do, and now down here on our delete to-do button, we want to go ahead and call this function. So we'll add an onClick onto our button, and this will be equal to a function here, an arrow function, and we'll go ahead and call our delete to-do function and pass in the ID of this to-do. We'll save that and come back into our app here, reload the page, get rid of this. Let's go and add another to-do. We'll say to be deleted, to delete. I spelled that wrong, that's fine. And if we come here and hit the delete button, it goes away. So that's working pretty well there as well. We reload the page, it's still gone because we deleted it from the database. Okay, perfect. So now the last step is just to make our edit button work. And this will be a little more complicated. We need to somehow give it another form so we can actually update the fields. And to do this, I decided I'm going to create a modal. So it'll be like this little pop-up window here. Not really a pop-up, but it'll be a screen that shows up over top of our to-dos card here. They'll have some new fields to put the title and description to change their values. And then we'll hit submit, and it'll then make the API request and everything to actually make those changes to the to-do in the database. So hopefully that makes sense. It's just one extra step. It shouldn't be that much different than we had before. So back inside of our Sublime text editor, let's go ahead and start by creating the API call, just where we're familiar with already. So we'll come over here. We'll put this above our delete to do function. So we'll do a const edit to do equals an async function again. In this case, we'll pass in the entire to do into this function. There'll be an arrow function, and inside here we'll do a try catch once again. And if there's an error, we'll just go ahead and just log the error. Okay, inside of our try, to make this change, all we have to do is just do an Axios.put request. So we'll do an await Axios.put, and we'll do once again API/v1/to-do. And actually these need to be backticks again because we need to do a $ and our pass our ID in there. So we'll change these quotes here to backticks. Okay, and there we go. And then finally, the last step is just to pass in our new to-do to this put request. So we'll pass in to-do right there. And then once again, let's get the new to-dos. So we'll do get to-dos right there. And that is it for the API request. Now let's go ahead and make this change inside of our to-do component. So first, we want to make this edit to-do. We want to make it accessible to our to-do component once again. So we'll go down to our to-do component down here, come over here. Let's go and add one more prop. We'll call it edit to-do equals edit to-do. And now we go into our to-do component and make the changes to actually make this button work. So first things first, up here inside of our props, let's go ahead and destructure it, edit to-do, just like that. And now we need to go ahead and make a modal show up so we can actually show or hide that modal when this edit button is clicked. So back inside of a browser, we can look at React Bootstrap and search for modal. And you'll see here we have a demo right here. You click on the button and it shows this little screen here And this will have our data. We'll have two input fields, one for the title, one for the description, where we can update the data inside of there. So looking at this example here, you can see we need to use our use state to create a piece of state for show, which will either show or hide it, which will even a value to either show or hide the modal. And then we'll have these handle functions that will set the value to either true or false. And then inside of here, we have our actual modal. So I'm going to go and copy all this to get started because I don't want to write all this from scratch when we're using this exact same code. So I'm going to copy this, come into our text editor. Let's come down below the row here, and we'll go and paste it all right there. Let's fix our indents a little bit. I'll grab all this and just tab it in. Okay. And now let's go ahead and add in our state and our handlers to change the state. So that'll be all this right up here. We're going to just copy this as well. And we'll come into our Sublime text editor up here at the top. We will go ahead and paste that. Outside of a return statement though, we'll paste it right up here. Match the indents right there. We'll add another space here just to make it a little easier to read. Okay, we'll go ahead and save that. So now we should have everything we need to actually make this show up. If we go to our button here and we added an on-click function, we should be able to make this test modal show up. So over here on our edit button, we'll add an on-click, and this will be equal to handle show to make it show up. Now let's go back into our app here. Looks like I forgot to bring in use state, it looks like, up here at the top. Let's go ahead and put a comma and curly braces. We'll bring in use state. Go ahead and save that. ID is not defined in our app.js. Okay, let's come back in there. Our app.js looks like, up here in our edit to do, I passed the whole to do in, but I put ID inside of our curly braces here. Let's put to do.id to get the ID off of this to do right here. Okay, there's a typo there. With that done, if I hit edit, it shows up this little modal here. Let's go ahead and make this actually show a form now. So inside our Sublime text editor, we'll go into our to do component again, and we'll come down to this modal, and first we'll change this title here to edit to do. And then this modal body, we don't want any text here. We want to pass in some actual form data itself. And so I'm going to copy this from our add to do to have a starting point. And so I'm going to grab all this form, these form tag right here, Go and just copy this, come back into our to do.js and paste it all right there. Let's go and fix these indents. Just like that. And now we need to go ahead and bring in form up here at the top. Oh, we already did, never mind. So we're good there. That might be all we need to do there actually. But next we need to go ahead and once again, we need to create some state for these form inputs. But we want to call this something different, so we don't have any sort of naming conventions with what we have up here. So you'll see inside of our add to do component, we created a title and a description. I'm going to copy this and just change these values to new title and new description. So we'll copy this, come in here, paste this there, and change the title to new title. And a description to, actually just go ahead and make this a capital T, and a new description right there. So now, when we change these values, it will set these values right here. We already have the on change here, so it will automatically set the title, which is up here, set title. We'll set the new title value to whatever's in that field there. But since we're editing it, we want to set a default that's empty, that's different than an empty string. So instead of putting this at default as an empty string, we want to put the default as whatever the current title is. So we'll pass in title there, and same thing for description, we'll pass in description. Go ahead and save that. Now with that done, we jump into our app here. We have the add to do handler. Right now we haven't created anything here yet, so I'm going to delete this and save that and change this value to update to do. Let's go back into our browser here. Okay, it doesn't like that, I guess. So we'll get rid of this whole on click for now. just so we can see that everything's showing up correctly. Okay, it looks like I just need to refresh the page, and that fixed that issue. Now that we have this working, we hit edit. We now will have a title and description field here with an update to do button to actually update this to do. Right now we have placeholders. Let's go ahead and remove the placeholders. And we'll set the value of this to be where the current value of the new title or new description fields are. So inside of our Sublime text editor, down into our form inside of our modal, we have these placeholder fields here. Let's go and just delete that. And let's go ahead and delete our placeholder field here as well. And instead, we'll put a value. And this equals curly braces, whatever we're on. In this case, this first one's description. This one up here will be title. Or new description, new title. Sorry. Let's change that. New description and new title. New title. Save that. Now, if we go ahead and close this, reopen it, you'll see we have our values already in here. And go in here, I can change it by editing things here. But when I hit submit, nothing happens. So let's go ahead and make this all work now. So right now, when we hit the on-click of this button here, all we're doing is just closing the modal. Let's go ahead and actually make the API call to update the values on this to-do. So instead of doing a handle close right here, let's delete this. And let's call this instead. We'll go ahead and call another function, and we'll call this one edit to do handler, I guess will work. And now inside of this edit to do handler, I want to pass in the title and the description. So title and description. So whatever the current value of those two fields are, we want to pass this to this edit to do handler function that we'll create here in a second, or we'll create it right now. We want to pass it to this edit to do handler function that we'll create right now. So up here, let's go ahead and create a function, and we'll call this just edit to do handler. So this equal to a arrow function. Now we gotta make sure we pass in the title and description to this function. So title and description. And now inside of this function, we want to do a couple things. First, we want to go ahead and close the modal. So we'll go ahead and call handle close to close the modal. But now once it's closed, we want to take this data, and you want to go ahead and create a new to-do with the updated data. So do const to-do equals an object, and inside here we'll pass an ID, colon ID, but once again, it's the same, so we can just put just ID, and we put title, put colon new title, and description, colon new description. And actually, I just realized an issue here. I put title and description down here. This should be new title and new description. Let's go and fix that. Now up here, I can pass in title, comma, and description, just like that. And now once we have that data in there, the last thing we want to do is call the edit to do function itself. So this function we created in our app.js to actually make the API call, we need to go ahead and call that inside of our to do component. So below this object here, I'll call edit to do and pass in this new to do object we just created. And that should make the API requests. There is one more thing we want to do though. I'll go ahead and show you real quick what we'll have a small bug. Oh, I forgot one thing here. Edit to do handler. I forgot to put the const right here. Let's go ahead and save that. Come back into our app. There's one issue here though. If I open this up, I hit save changes. So first issue here is I have an update to do button here and a save changes button here. Let's go ahead and fix that. We only need one button. So inside of our to-do component inside of the modal, let's go ahead and remove this update to-do button. We don't need that button at all, so let's get rid of it. And on the save changes where we actually have this event handler being called, so back in here, if we go ahead and edit this to-do and type in some details here, updated, and hit save changes, nothing's happening. Looks like we got an error of a status code of 500. Let's take a look at that and try this again and see why that's failing. Oh, I forgot trailing slash. It's easy to forget. At the end of every API string here, we need to put a trailing slash at the very end. So right here, I didn't put one, and right here, I also didn't put one. Make sure you have those all right there. Let's save this and let's try this one more time. Okay, there we go. So now this is working. But what I wanted to show you was if you hit edit again, and we put some data here, whatever, hit close and open up again, it still saves this data in here. We don't want that. We want to get rid of it if we close the modal. So the last thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and make that change. So once we hit the close or once we hit the submit, the state that's being stored inside of these new, where is it? Inside of this new title and new description field, it goes back to being what the current title and description is. So down here inside of our edit to do handler, after we make the API request, let's go ahead and just call set title and set it back to the title. And we'll do set description and set it back to the description. And on our handle close, we're gonna do the same thing. So up here at the top, let's go ahead and put this on a new line. We'll add our curly braces so we can put this on multiple line. Put this inside of the function. Now below this, we want to put sets or set title to be the title and the set description to be the description. So now if I come back here, I can still edit it just fine. If I were to put whatever in here, save changes, it updates it. And now if I go in here, I put a bunch of random data and hit close and come back, it gets rid of that data, doesn't save it in there. Just a small little bug that just makes this look a little better. But that's really it. Now we have a working to-do app with all the basic CRUD functionality. We can add to-do right here by typing in some values in here. We can mark it as completed by hitting the check mark. We can edit it by hitting the edit button and filling out this modal. And we also can delete it by hitting the delete button. So we put together a complete API using Django and then built a front end with React. So hopefully this was good if you don't have a ton of experience building APIs or a ton of experience with React. Hopefully it helps get a basic understanding of what's going on here. Again, this might have been a little confusing if you don't know anything about React. So if that's the case, just go through a couple of basic crash courses and this should all make a lot more sense after you do that. I can make videos in the future going through some of these concepts if that would be helpful. But other than that, that's really it for this video. Let me know what you want to see more of. I can make more Django React videos or make more just regular Django videos. I'm planning on going back to the social network and adding a couple more videos to that in the future. So those will be up here soon. But other than that, the code will be in the description below. And I'll put the links to some of the documentation in the description as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.